In my final year in Durham, many years ago, Sarah had already left to go and do her PGCE in Cambridge. And it was a time, yes, before smartphones and FaceTime. That meant we went from being together all the time to not seeing each other for weeks on end and communicating on the phone a few times a week until the money in the payphone ran out. You might be old enough to remember the pips going, which meant you were running out of money. If you don't understand, please talk to your elders after the service. There were lots of ways in which being apart was hard, but one of the most difficult was communication. A word out of place on the phone weighed with you until it could be resolved. A misunderstanding which needed time, presence, or a hug to get beyond had to wait until you were in the same place again. Even sharing that you were both miserable being apart did nothing other than make that misery seem even heavier. Communication across the miles is hard. Even now, with all of the other ways of being able to keep in touch, communicating when you're apart from loved ones isn't always straightforward. For example, I love talking to my mum, but when she's upset and confused, or tells me for the fourth time this week that she wishes I lived closer, communication gets difficult. And as for the times when Mum wants me to be tech support for her television from 250 miles away, words fail me. I can't honestly picture from Southampton all the contextual memories on her television, not even be sure which remote she's holding. She has been known to try and operate her television with her mobile phone, so communicating then with her is really hard. I realize every week just how difficult technology, which is supposed to make our lives easier, can become. It's disabling for her. Why am I talking about this? Simply because 2 Corinthians is basically Paul trying to communicate from afar with the Corinthians. He's trying to resolve some misunderstandings that have arisen between him and the church in Corinth. He planted the church in Corinth and remained there for 18 months or so. He'd begun by teaching in the synagogue, but when the opposition there became too intense, he publicly withdrew and started teaching at the home of a church member. But he then left to travel through the country to Ephesus, beginning there what became a 3-year mission to establish a church in Ephesus. But many in the church in Corinth missed his teaching, his wisdom, and his authority. They sent at least 2 detailed letters that we know about, letters which led him to write the letter we call 1 Corinthians in reply. That letter brought the tensions within the church in Corinth to the surface. So great was the controversy it provoked that Paul felt compelled to make a hurried visit to Corinth. And in that visit, when teaching the gathered church, it appears that Paul's right to teach them and to govern the church in Corinth was openly challenged. If you read 2 Corinthians 2, 5-8, you'll see a short account of that. So during that hurried visit, Paul had made a public promise to visit them twice more. Once on the way to Jerusalem with the collection he'd taken up for the church in Judea, and again on the way back. But he then thought better of that promise. 2 Corinthians 2:1 tells us that he was concerned that another painful visit would simply lead to more controversy. So he wrote them a challenging letter instead, a letter that we no longer have. That letter seems to have brought them to their senses and have led, according to 2 Corinthians 7, 8-12, to real repentance and godly sorrow. But while things are much better between them than they were, as the Corinthians have addressed the issues within their fellowship that Paul was really concerned about, he now stands accused of breaking his promise to visit them twice. And to add to it, newly arrived Jewish Christian leaders are using that and other reasons to undermine his role as their leader. They're questioning his claim to be an apostle at all. That's the situation which prompts Paul to write the letter we call 2 Corinthians. As he's defending himself, it suggests that we should read most of his references to we and to us as being references to himself. And in today's passage, we find Paul insisting that despite all the challenges and opposition he's facing, he does not lose heart, in both verse 1 and verse 16. So let's look together at the reasons Paul gives for that refusal to lose heart. First reason, because Paul saw Jesus' face. Because Paul saw Jesus' face. A key question was, so what constitutes an apostle? When they were looking for a replacement for Judas, Peter defined it in Acts 1 that it had to be someone who'd been with them from the beginning, who'd seen Jesus' ministry from the baptism of John all the way through to witnessing the resurrection. Now, if that's how you define what it means to be an apostle, you rule Paul out. Remember, Peter had also visited the church in Corinth. So if he'd been asked when he was there, so what constitutes an apostle, and given that as his answer, then he would have clearly undermined Paul's position. Other Jewish Christian leaders who were arguing against Paul that Gentile and Jewish Christians had to keep the law probably seized upon that as evidence that he was not an apostle, and that therefore he had no continuing right to act as their teacher and their governor. And you know what? Paul gets that there's a problem with his credentials. As he says in 1 Corinthians 15, 7 and 8, then Jesus appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all he appeared to me also as the one abnormally born. So he gets it. He knows that there's something unorthodox about his calling to be an apostle. So yes, that would rule him out, except that the Lord has ruled him in. What makes the difference is his encounter with Jesus. Verse 6, for God who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. Remember that the we and us references are to be understood as referring to Paul himself. What's he saying here? He's saying that he saw in Acts 9:3 a light from heaven flashing around him, that he saw in the face of Jesus the one true light that made him understand God's glory, the presence of God's very self in Jesus, that the God who created all light revealed the light of his presence in Jesus within Paul, made his light shine in my heart, meaning he saw a glimpse of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ. Paul is saying, I saw the risen Jesus' face. So whatever other qualifications I may not have, I have to base my claim to be an apostle on this. I have seen the face of Jesus. As he was calling me to be his apostle to the Gentiles, I saw the face of Jesus. That's the beginning and the end of my claim. Peter and others may not agree, but I have seen the risen Lord's face, and that makes me equally a witness of the resurrection. So Paul does not lose heart because he saw the face of Jesus. Second reason why Paul doesn't lose heart, because he sees God at work in his struggles. We get too concerned for the packaging sometimes. We want celebrity endorsements for our faith. We want the music to be thrilling and the coffee to be brilliant and the talk to be both shorter and more enthralling. We want the show that is worship to be slick and well produced. We want the minister to be someone we'd be happy to hang out with in a bar, ideally with the right trainers and the right length and style of jeans. We want worship to be cooler sometimes. I've certainly been to churches where I wondered if I'd ever feel cool enough to worship there. We get too concerned for the packaging sometimes. And they were in Corinth as well. 2 Corinthians 10:10 has Paul quoting, for some say his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he is unimpressive and his speaking amounts to nothing. Paul didn't speak in the accepted Greek style. It's thought that Paul wasn't tall, and he suffered from some continuing illnesses. The thorn in his flesh mentioned in 2 Corinthians 12 seems to have been debilitating. So he didn't look the part from their point of view. He didn't speak in the accepted Greek style. He might not have always looked all that well. And his constant struggles, some argued, show that God wasn't really with him, because if God really was really with him, he wouldn't be struggling in all of these ways. Paul wasn't quite the packaging they wanted. And as we are sometimes, they were also too concerned for the packaging. But Paul is encouraged that he is no more than earthenware in verse 7, the reference to jars of clay. He is not posh pottery. He's the ordinary stuff. Why does that matter to Paul? Because people are then impressed not by Paul, but by Jesus shining out of Paul. That's the treasure in the earthenware. Impressed not by the packaging, not by the posh pottery, but by the light escaping out of him in all directions. By the ordinary earthenware that lets the glory of Jesus be seen. That's what verse 7 allows the all-surpassing power from God to be seen in and through Paul's ministry. He wrote in 1 Corinthians 2, 4 and 5 that he deliberately ignored the packaging. I quote, "My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, might not rest on the packaging, but on God's power, on the substance." The substance matters, he's saying, not the packaging. Too much attention to the packaging risks the substance being lost or overlooked. Not only is he happy to be the ordinary stuff rather than to be posh pottery, Paul sees this as showing his authenticity. His struggles echo the crucifixion of Jesus, he asserts, meaning also that God's presence in those struggles shows forth Jesus' resurrection power. So yes, he gets hard-pressed in every way, he does, but God's power ensures he isn't crushed. Yes, he often feels he can't see the way forward, he's often persecuted, but God's presence means he's never without hope. Never abandoned. Yes, sometimes he even suffers violence, but God's resurrection power means he's never destroyed. So posh pottery might look nice, but ordinary earthenware stuff is more resilient. Not only does the light shine out of him, God's sustaining power is present in his troubles and shows it even more. The very things for which they judged and found him wanting are the same things that show to Paul that the all-surpassing power is from God and not from himself. So they can keep their fancy packaging, just as long as God's risen power continues to be at work even in his very lowest moments. Third reason why he doesn't lose heart, because he hopes for all that is yet to come. I don't know if you're watching Celebrity Race across the world at the moment, but I found the pairing of Anita Rani and her dad unexpectedly moving. His selflessness in working for his family and turning away from his own ambitions to do so has nourished Anita in all kinds of ways which she acknowledges. It's given her a deep and abiding love for her father that's transparently obvious. But the meaning of her father's sacrifice isn't seen in what it's breathed into her, not just her love for her father, but also the confidence and the spirit to step into everything she has carried into her life. That's the heart of parenthood, really. It's the biggest antidote to self-centeredness there is, which might be why fewer people are choosing it in this generation. Likewise here, Paul insists that his struggles have been for their benefit. His experiencing suffering for Christ's sake has released the power of the risen Lord, not just in Paul himself, but through Paul into their lives. Verse 12, so then death is at work in us, death is at work in him, but life is at work in you. Paul's sustained in his struggles by his hope that they will lead to those to whom he is ministering, receiving the presence and power of the risen Lord. Verse 15, all this is for your benefit, meaning everything that he has suffered while ministering on their behalf. All this is for your benefit, so that the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. Paul does not lose heart because of the fruit of his struggles in their lives rather than his own. He's become as other-centered as many do as parents. Yet the hope that sustains Paul isn't just for now, isn't just that they would be blessed in this life, amazing though that is. Of course, he has never known Jesus as anyone other than a risen Lord. So it's natural for him to look beyond this life to the resurrection. So verse 14, Paul has faith because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you to himself. He looks beyond this life to heaven, and that puts all of his struggles in the right perspective. For what are they really, he says, compared to this? Even if he's been imprisoned, flogged, shipwrecked, stoned, hungry, thirsty, cold and naked, betrayed and threatened, as he details in 2 Corinthians 11, nothing compares to what is to come. Verse 17, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So he fixes his eyes on what is to come, as the Advent season reminds us to do every year. He fixes his eyes on what is to come, knowing not only that in this life will he daily be renewed by the presence of the Spirit, but also that in the life to come he will know delight in God's presence forevermore. So Paul does not lose heart. I love that it's not a resolution he's making, I will not lose heart. It's a statement, it's a reality in which he stands. I do not lose heart. He does not lose heart because he saw Jesus' face, because he sees God at work in and through his struggles, and because he hopes for all that is yet to come. So what does all this mean for us today? Invites us to remember first how precious it is to encounter God. How precious it is to encounter God. In whatever way that happens, through the scriptures or through worship songs, through stillness in private prayer or ministry in the power of the Spirit, through receiving bread or wine or walking in creation, in whatever way that happens, encountering God is the heartbeat of everything we are and do as Christians. Paul was sustained in all of this by the fact that he had seen the face of the risen Lord. How recently would you say you'd encountered God, and in what ways? And how are you seeking him to encounter him afresh at the moment? It's the heartbeat of everything. It challenges us, second, where might we be more concerned for the packaging than the substance? More concerned for the packaging than the substance. I'm not saying that the packaging doesn't matter at all. It's good to bring our best to the Lord's service. It's good to give our heart, soul, and spirit to loving the Lord. But the packaging only matters if the substance is also good. Where might we be more concerned for the packaging than the substance of receiving God's love and grace? And where might we be too concerned to look good in the Lord's service? To present the gospel and Jesus without risking our reputations, risking our dignity, or without appearing too religious? What would you never risk for Jesus? What is beyond his authority in your life forever? How willing are we to be earthenware rather than posh pottery for Jesus, if that's what he requires of us? If that's what it requires for his all-surpassing power to be seen through us? Where might we be more concerned for our dignity, for our reputation, for the packaging than the substance? And it invites us, third, not to lose heart. Not to lose heart. I love the fact that Paul states this as a reality he inhabits rather than a resolution. It's not, I will not lose heart. It's, I do not lose heart. I never lack courage to live for Jesus. I can't say that I manage that all the time. There are days when it's harder than others. But the invitation in our passage is to seek God's strength and God's power, that we might be inwardly renewed day by day, as verse 16 has it. So if you know there are times when you lose heart, or there are areas in your life in which you lack courage, or issues that you're struggling to face, pray that your hope will be renewed. It might for us have to start with a resolution rather than a reality. It might for us have to start, I will not lose heart. But that can become an I do not lose heart, become an I never lack courage. Why? Because I encounter the Lord often. Why? Because I see what my struggles are working in others. Why? Because I look to the future with confidence, trusting that whatever light and momentary troubles we face now, as overwhelming as sometimes they seem, whatever light and momentary troubles we face now, we're going to receive an eternal glory that will far outweigh them all. Would you seek the courage to become somebody who never loses heart in Jesus?